Hashtag psychotherapy unfogged with Mark Fielding.
Hello, welcome to Series 6, Episode 3 of Hashtag Psychotherapy Unfold. As you know, I'm Mark Fielding, a psychotherapist and relationship counsellor, and your host. Today, I have the absolute pleasure to interview Susan E. Schwartz, PhD. Susan is a member of the International Association of Analytical Psychology. Susan presents workshops in various areas of Jungian analytic psychology, such as daughters and fathers, literature and psychology, the shadow, and many more areas, which we can hopefully touch on a few more today. Obviously, Jungian analytic psychology is an enormous area, so we'll try and do it credit today. Susan works towards her PhD at the C.G. Jung Institute in Zurich, Switzerland, and has written many books. The regular listeners will know that we'll put all of Susan's links to all of the books and everything that she does on with her show notes and on her various social media sites. It's really fantastic to meet you, Susan. Thank you so much for coming on. Could we kick off? Could I just ask you a little bit about you? Could you just tell our listeners a little bit about you, Susan, if that's okay? Big
Well,
question.
yes, it's a huge question. It's as huge as it's big question. About myself, I have been doing this for many years. This means therapist, first social worker, therapist, now Jungian analyst for many years. And what I like is the challenge and burden of becoming oneself.
Yeah.
So that is a personal answer, but it's also an answer that many people can relate to. And it means that one is always uncovering different information about oneself. Not always gorgeous, but definitely helpful through dreams, active imagination. I would also say through writing and through the analysis itself. I think because you said you're a relational therapist, it is the relationship and how we really show up that I think is opens the door to the depth of one's being and also the collective. So it's a personal journey and a collective journey.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And some may argue that, the need for this the world really needs more people to be making this personal journey.
My hope is that in the disasters of the world, from that will come more of a personal explorations, which will add to the collective knowledge.
Yes.
However, we are always in cycles like this current time.
Yeah.
And really focusing on the importance of what it is to become conscious. It is a big task to be as conscious as we can. Our world needs it, and we need it too.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I guess with Jung's model, I mean, as far as obviously your understanding is far greater than mine, but I guess evolving and becoming our authentic selves, I guess is part of his model. I'm thinking of his typology really in particular. I guess that is around wholeness, isn't it? And kind of unification of the opposites.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Wholeness, I think, is such a tricky word because do we ever get whole? I think that it's not necessarily to get there, but it is the process of what we are in that replicates our own personal lives, but the development into our personal selves and then into the collective. So being genuinely and authentically true is a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah, I mean,
we fall into unconsciousness so fast. It's amazing.
yeah. And I guess it's a lifetime journey, and we're constantly changing and constantly evolving, aren't we? You've mentioned the collective a few times, the collective unconscious. Now, again, it's an enormous, probably every question I'm going to ask you, Susan, we could spend hours talking about today. But in terms of, for our listeners that don't really understand, Jung's conception of the collective unconscious, could you possibly say a little bit about it? What is it?
Yes,
Yeah.
well, and of course, this is my individual interpretation of it
Mm,
as well. But it's a way that people can understand each other because we are all human. So
mm,
when we watch on television, on the internet about crises and problems and joys of people around the world, we can relate to them personally because we are human beings.
yes.
And I think that's what's primary. Equally, if we don't pay attention to what is going on in the collective, in politics, in our countries,
Mm,
then we are missing out on what is happening in the world. So it's again a connection of oneself, also beyond the world. I think that we need to um, take that into account. Otherwise, we're not really dealing with the entirety of the psyche.
mm,
So the collective, again,
mm,
is a personal and collective. On the unconscious also requires consciousness. So when you say collective unconscious, that has to be connected to the collective consciousness.
mm. And how do archetypes come into this? And there's a lot around in kind of social media actually, and in pop psychology now around archetypes, which I'm not saying is wrong. I mean, it's good that some of this kind of stuff is coming into the public domain, but I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around, what an archetype is. I mean, for you, and again, it's an enormous question, I know, but what is it? I mean, the archetypes of the unconscious, what
You
are
know that,
they? Yeah.
well, I like Jung's definition in a way, one of many. He's
Mm,
got 10 zillion
yeah.
definitions of what an archetype is, but it's like a dry riverbed, and
Mm,
that each of us are going to fill it differently. So,
mm,
for instance, we all have the archetype of father, mother, family, country, this and that, and each
mm.
of us will fill it in a different way.
Yes.
But even when you mention archetype, what is it? There is currently within the Jungian world a question of, so what is the archetype?
Mm,
So all these years later, people are evaluating, but that means becoming conscious,
yes.
re-looking at. You don't want to just go,
Mm,
oh, that's the mother archetype. Well, wait a
mm,
second. How is that
mm,
inside of you? How does it appear in your dreams,
mm,
your relationships, your
mm,
life? How
mm,
do you project it out? So the archetype is supposed to have life. It's
mm,
not a static position
mm.
at all. And it changes in time. So we could say, because I've written on fathers and I'm currently writing on fathers and sons,
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
yeah, the archetype of the father has changed. It
Mm,
it is different than it was 100 years ago
mm,
and will be different 100 years from now.
mm,
How we live it is the question,
mm,
and how conscious we are
mm,
of it. So that's kind of a long answer
mm,
to what is an
mm,
archetype, because there are so many more, you're right, so many more answers,
mm.
but that reflects that the psyche goes on and on and on and
Mm.
on.
Absolutely.
Therefore, always
Mm,
interesting,
mm,
always interesting.
mm. Yeah, and this is maybe a slight segue, but I mean, I love Carl Jung's analytic psychology, and it's actually everywhere, isn't it? People may not realize that don't really know much about it, but really, beautifully, it's everywhere, isn't it?
It
At the
is.
moment, well,
Well,
for years, really. I mean,
yeah,
it infiltrates, so many different areas, doesn't it? His work.
true. But of
Mm,
course, Jung, like all of us, built on Plato's, we didn't know about built on Plato, but it always comes from our history.
yeah.
Whatever our terms are, come in our history, and then we put our personal spin
Yes.
upon that. So Jung put his personal spin on Plato's idea, the first idea, the archetype.
Mm,
And then from that, we all put our own idea on it
mm,
as
mm,
well.
mm,
I think the question is how we are really living it, whatever the
mm,
archetypes are in each of us, and
mm.
they're all going to be kind of different.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
They're going to be different. And
Mm,
it's the difference that allows us to understand others.
Mm.
And we
Mm.
live in a world that's pretty fragmented in many ways.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And so we tend to eliminate or want to make it simple and eliminate other, but that would mean eliminating so many pieces that are valuable within ourselves.
That's so
Even as
true.
you
Yeah.
mentioned the shadow.
Yeah.
Well, the shadow are the pieces that we haven't used. They could be great
Yeah.
and they could be horrifying.
Mm. Mm.
We want to know the whole range.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, the shadow is another concept that I think is very much kind of out there in the public domain now, and good. I mean, how do you? I mean, this is maybe moving around a little bit, but in terms of, it depends on the client, of course, but generally in your work, how do you help people? How do you facilitate others connecting with their shadow? Depends on the person, doesn't it? But in terms of your model, in terms of Jung's model. How does that work? I mean, how do people do that?
Well, so Jung said this kind of interesting phrase, which was, I'm glad I'm Jung, not a Jungian.
Mm.
Okay. So
I have read that.
yeah. So how do I do it in
Mm.
my own particular way
Yes. Yeah.
is mine. So
Yes.
my subjective way. And I'm usually pretty directive. And
Mm.
I will say, yeah, but that figure that you don't like in that dream,
Mm.
don't you think that's you?
Mm.
And what if it is you? And what if it is the part that you're not accessing as
Yeah.
a part of you because it could be valuable?
Mm.
So I think accessing, the pieces we don't really want to admit about
Mm.
ourselves.
Mm.
Jung has said this. They carry the gold.
Mm.
They carry
Definitely.
the gold.
Yeah.
Even you said earlier about typology,
Mm.
the thing that we're worst at is the thing that can carry the secret, the answer, the the
Definitely.
gold in the
Mm.
personality, because you don't
Mm.
use it very much
Mm.
because you're kind of lousy at it.
Mm.
Occasionally, boom, it will come with an answer.
Mm.
So I, with people, am very, what should I say, open to let's explore this together,
Mm.
not avoid,
Mm.
but be in it,
Mm.
no matter how it feels, be in it.
Mm.
We tend to project. We will say, oh, it's so and so out here. What if that's a part of us?
Yeah.
So that's how I don't usually use, I don't know if you do, but
Mm.
I don't usually use terminology. I find it distancing.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to
Mm.
bring it into the humanness,
Mm.
but also of what happens between us.
Mm.
I'm not a better than. I feel that, we
Mm.
work together,
Mm.
and
Mm.
that to me is very appealing.
Mm.
I because that's human.
Mm.
Is
Absolutely. Yeah, the,
yeah.
the the connection, the relationship. Yeah, and again, there's so much research around the relationship, being the most, the most important factor in any type of modality in therapy, in counseling, which I think is true. Dream work is a big part of the of analytic psychology. I, could you say a little, again, it's a big question. Could you say a little bit around how dream work comes into the modality? I mean, how you would work with dreams, depending on the person, of
Well,
course.
I oftentimes will now not every analyst does this, but
Yeah.
I oftentimes will ask people, do you have a dream that
Mm.
could help us figure this out? Or did you have a recent one? Or,
Mm.
sometimes because of our world, people will send me their dream ahead of time on the computer,
Mm.
on the phone, and we look at it together.
Yes.
It's the togetherness.
Mm.
Jung also said, I'm going to go back just a bit,
Okay.
this to what you said. Jung says that, and I think this is so true. If we are not willing to change ourselves, and to grow, then how are we going to help anyone? So that means that who comes into our office is going to have an effect. I'm glad it has an effect, but I want to become conscious of what the effect is. I don't want to be unconscious of what is happening
Right.
so that I can help the person become all of themselves. But I want to be open to learning from what they are saying so that I can do that. Therefore, both of us will change.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as therapists, we don't, consciously go into the area in order to, develop ourselves, but we do. I mean, with every client I see, I grow, and I think this
Totally.
is partly what you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is another side to that, which is there are certain toxic things that happen between people, and therefore, as analysts and therapists, we really have to pay attention
Mm,
to our psyches and our body.
mm,
So I bring in oftentimes with people, because I consider it analytical, how they care for their bodies
yeah.
and how, just even to the details of what do you eat?
Yeah.
What do you eat? What do you drink? What are
Mm,
you taking into your system and why
mm,
are you doing it? What are
mm,
you avoiding? What are you enhancing?
mm,
What are you destructive with?
mm,
So the body is very important. And I think that analysts and therapists, we have to take care of our own
mm.
as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, it could be subsumed under the kind of umbrella of self-care, but it is more than that, isn't it? And we have to look after ourselves. We have to be self-compassionate, but we also have to grow. I mean, there's someone said, I forget exactly who said this, but we can only take our clients as far as we've gone ourselves, and I think that's spot on, really, honestly. So we have to keep working.
Exactly.
Mm,
So if we keep working and if we are open, it, again, there's no borders to the psyche. So if we're open to the
right.
unknown, it's okay. But if
Mm,
you have to stay within a rigid theoretical basis,
mm,
I think we could hide behind theory
mm. Yes.
and not
Mm,
honor
mm,
people who are someone who comes from something different or different
mm,
cultures,
mm,
different backgrounds.
mm,
Too many people hide behind the theory,
mm.
I think.
Yeah, I would. Identification with the persona. For
Exactly.
some therapists, I mean, I hope it's okay for me to say this, but some counselors, some therapists can do that. They identify with the persona of being the counselor, and that maybe creates a bit of distance, perhaps, between them and others, but between them and the clients, potentially. Yeah,
I agree with you. I think what
yeah,
it does is it reinforces the power differential,
yes,
which people anyway project as a power differential. If we fall into it, then we are probably reenacting their own internal world where they
mm,
are not taking on their own power
yeah,
in the right way,
mm, mm,
in the right way. And then we are acting, I'm going to extend it. We're acting kind of totalitarian.
mm,
Yeah, I'm right. I'm going to tell you what to do. That's totalitarian.
mm.
There's
Yeah, true.
no room to grow and develop. And one of the things that I really like about Jungian psychology is the use of fairy tales and mythology
Yes, yeah.
as they show humanness. They show a
Absolutely.
process of life.
Mm, mm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just really struck with, Jung drew from everywhere, didn't he? I mean, it's quite incredible, really, his life. I mean, he drew from everywhere, and I think about the difference, and I mean, my initial training was quite psychoanalytic, quite Freudian, really. And both approaches, they both give something very, very important, but they were
Yes.
quite different, and they were both a source of conflict between them. And perhaps there's probably lots of ways to, to talk about it, but maybe Freud was maybe a little bit kind of, oh, I don't know, left brain. There's a million ways we could describe this. Whereas Jung, I think he's, goodness me, he just poured intuitive. He just poured in information from everywhere, didn't he? Which is what I love about his work. Nothing was untouched, really.
I agree with you. I
Yeah.
think also the dynamic between Freud and Jung
Mm,
is something I'm writing about now on
mm,
the book on sons and fathers,
mm,
because here's a dynamic, which is a very important one that they both fell into
mm.
and wrote about in their letters to each other.
Yes.
And it's very interesting that they were aware of it and could not get through it. It
Mm,
shows the humanness. There are
mm,
some things, some complexes we won't get through.
no.
You just can't in your life.
Mm,
So I think, well, it's a good enough process
mm.
that people get, we all get as far as we need to go.
Yeah.
You could, right? You can wish for more, but
Mm,
Freud and Jung, I think both of them, at least when you read the letters, seems like they wished,
mm.
but they could not do it because they each needed to go their own way.
I think that's very, very true. And they both brought so much into the field. I mean, just looking at, at Freud's kind of models of the mind, I mean, they're used everywhere now, and he produced them years ago. So I could just moving around again, I must ask you, what was it like to train and learn at the C.G. Jung Institute in Switzerland? Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by what that might, what that was like.
Well, it was quite a few years ago,
Yeah.
actually. However, it was very interesting
Mm,
being, well, because I'm an American, very different than
mm,
Swiss. And so I really appreciated my difference and felt what it was like
mm,
to live in a different place
mm.
where nobody really understood. Okay. And then having also a very interesting experiences when my analysts would not understand the dream because it had American symbols. And
Culturally different. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then what it required of me was to explain what that was.
Mm,
So what we consider familiar is met with unfamiliar. And that's what it was like to be going to the Institute
mm,
in Switzerland
mm,
all the time. Totally unfamiliar,
mm,
you know. And
mm.
that's helpful because it makes you understand yourself.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a challenge and it was interesting and it was basic and difficult.
Mm,
But you know what? Life is. So that's life, you
mm,
know?
mm,
I would say another thing too, which
mm,
is there's such a stigma in a certain way about doing something at a certain time in life, and people will say, "Oh my, you're going you're going to lose because now you're going to do something different and that will be a loss. So
mm,
change will be a loss."
mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Huh? This is why people resist change.
Yeah.
They
True.
don't know yeah, they think it'll be a loss. I can't tell
Mm,
you the amount of people that told me, "Are you kidding? This is ridiculous.
mm.
It will be a loss." It was a gain for sure.
It's what I'm just thinking, what an amazing experience. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
really.
Because I guess people struggle with uncertainty, don't they? Depending on the individual, of course, but but I guess change comes with uncertainty, and some people are very scared of uncertainty. But of course, that's where the growth is, isn't it? Often new
Totally.
experiences.
Yeah, but isn't that why people come into analysis and therapy is to find out about what they are uncertain of, but they don't want to know that. They
No.
want to know, give me an answer. I have to fix this symptom,
Yeah. Yeah.
but the uncertainty
Mm,
fixes it.
mm,
If you
mm.
can stay with uncertainty, it's who is it? Keats, who talks about negative capability. It's a great concept. Stay with uncertainty. Well, it's in every single legend, fairy tale, and myth of the world. Uncertainty.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's nothing's certain. We're kind of in a fantasy if we think it's life is certain.
I mean, yeah, I mean, but that could take us to a whole nother area that we don't need to go on. But I'm thinking about Buddhist psychology, really, and yeah,
Yeah.
and we have this idea that we know what's going to happen, tomorrow, next week, in 10 years' time, but really, we don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 minutes. I mean, it is a complete illusion, really, that we have human beings of control. We have no control over anything, really.
No.
Yeah.
Another thing, which I think is rather a principle, that's a big word, actually for me, but in Jungian psychology, which is that you come to each session not knowing.
No, yes, perfect. Yeah.
Don't know. Be open. Don't sit and memorize whatever, but be open to what the
Mm,
day is going to bring you. It's
mm,
openness to the psyche. It's
mm,
openness really to the other person and to the relationship
mm,
between, which
mm,
is of so much value that if you come in preconceived
mm.
or preconceived where someone should be going, you're limiting them.
So true. Absolutely. It should be a really creative space. And I'm linking in the dreams, but I'm also linking in active imagination as well. I mean, that's a technique I've used a lot. And that's a technique that I had long periods of psychosynthesis, which is not Jungian therapy, but they use a lot of active imagination. And I personally found active imagination to be so incredibly powerful. Some of the scenarios, I remember them like they were yesterday, and this was like 10, 15 years ago. So I wonder, could you just explain a little bit to our listeners what active imagination is? It's a big part of the Jungian model, isn't it, potentially?
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
You explained it very well in the sense that one allows oneself to drop into the
yeah,
unconscious. It's like you just go there, no judgment. You let yourself write, draw, dance, whatever, in what is natural, and you find your natural self, but you also find your creativity.
yeah,
And I think that creative space is what we try to access
mm,
in the active imagination,
mm,
because our creativity can get too restricted by some ego trip that it's
definitely.
supposed to be this and this.
Mm,
And it's the freedom in the active
mm,
imagination
mm,
to express and be, which is probably why you remember it
mm,
all these years
mm,
later,
mm,
because it's so different than how we live in our structured.
definitely.
I think we need free space to
Mm.
just flow.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's just fascinating, active imagination when you go in and yeah, I guess one would hope that the ego can be put to one side and the unconscious, the power and the creativity and it's just incredible. Yeah, I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. Let me ask you about your books. I must ask you about your books. I know you've written lots and lots of books. Could you tell our listeners a little bit around your books, how they might access them?
Yes, yes. Well, so do you want me to give the titles? They all actually are connected. So
Okay.
the first one is The Absent Father Effect on Daughters.
Mhm.
The second one is the imposter syndrome and the as if personality.
Mm.
The third that just came out in December is the Puella archetype
Interesting.
in,
Yeah.
in Jungian psychology.
Mm.
And then in July is love and narcissism,
Mm.
tragedy and intimacy.
Mm.
And then there will be sons and fathers.
Mm.
So, what is kind of key within all of them is because they all have the perspective of Jungian psychology, but they also speak about what we are lacking, what we are covering up with, how do we grow from where we are. All of them also have a bit of narcissism within them.
Mm.
And I mention that because currently people will say so and so's a narcissist without even understanding what narcissism
True.
is.
Yeah.
And all of them speak to this singularity of being, which is like living behind a wall.
Mm.
And I have found in my work that so many people, when I say, do you live behind a wall? Oh, yeah, they do.
Yeah.
They live behind the protective wall. How do you grow when you're behind a wall?
Mm.
So, and all of the books came out of a certain creative space.
Mm.
They also come from my own, I mean, they have to. One doesn't write about something that you're not interested in.
No.
So they come from the people that I have worked with, and they come from myself as well. What has grabbed me about Jungian psychology and also lacks within Jungian psychology?
Mm.
What has not been addressed? Do you know Jung
Mm.
had one essay on the father? One. He
Wow,
had
I
he
didn't
had
know that.
five children,
Mm.
one essay. But I think it reflected the times. I also think it reflected Jung.
Mm.
That's why I mentioned Freud as the father,
Mm. Yes.
another
Yeah.
disappointing father. So there are, and thank goodness, that's again, Jung says, I'm Jung, not a Jungian. Space
Mm.
to grow,
Mm.
space to develop, space to
Mm.
put yourself and your ideas into the world.
Mm.
It's what motivated me. And I think there's something else connected with all of this that Jung spoke about living your entire life so that when you get to be whatever age, keep living. That to me is fantastic.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Too many people say, really? Why are you doing that? On and on and on. Why are they saying that? Their own projections for sure,
Yeah.
but this kind of value yourself through your entire life.
Mm.
We
Mm.
all can continue to grow and learn in depth.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. I mean, midlife and on. I mean, it's the potential for growth. It's just depending on, who we are, where we live in the world, but certainly in the West, the potential for growth from midlife and older is vast. I mean, even having the time, when we're 20 and we're building a career and we're trying to, support family but when we are able to take a breath, and that often happens in midlife, doesn't it? I think the potential for growth and creativity and pivoting, it's just potentially enormous. But of course, Western culture, it looks at age quite negatively. People are past their sell-by date. I mean, that's a very coarse way to put it, but I think that's often true, isn't it? That's how Western society kind of views aging. I mean, different in other cultures, but certainly in the West.
It is
Yeah.
true. Yeah. And I think there's a denigration of the arc of life, which
Mm.
Jungian psychology totally honors.
Mm.
I really believe and see quite a few people who are up there in age, whatever that means.
Mm.
And they are searching for themselves and
Mm.
know the
Yes.
value for their entire life. There is another thing. The more you know, it doesn't keep you totally healthy, but it certainly helps.
Mm. Oh yeah.
It's it certainly helps. And I would say also that's why I integrate the body and care
Mm.
in all of my books, because
Mm.
if it's only a head trip, where's the body, mind, and soul?
True. Yeah. Yeah, because we are holistic beings, aren't we? The
Yes,
medical separation of mind and body. I mean, I understand why the medical model does that, but yeah, we are holistic systems, aren't we? Yeah.
yes. And as you say, the medical model is not really the model of Jungian psychology.
Mm. No, I mean, it couldn't be more different. It's almost the antithesis, really, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. That's
Yeah.
why I said that. It's so different. It's like really, we're on other sides. Not that we don't need each other.
No, yes.
We do,
Yeah.
but we also, I think that Jungians tend more to um, access medical. The medical accesses
Mm,
the soul,
yeah. Yeah.
at least in the United States.
Mm,
Doesn't exist enough. So I think the more that
mm,
we talk, the
mm,
more that we bring out, quite like what you do,
mm,
it creates knowledge in the world.
mm. Definitely.
You know, beyond that
Mm,
strict medical kind of ego-driven
yeah,
deal that
definitely.
isn't big enough.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, again, I'm just repeating myself, but but I just love Young because it's just it's so expansive. I mean, I'd love to have met him. I mean, he's such an interesting guy. Apart from, he's psychology. I mean, he lived a very interesting life. I had the pleasure. I was in Switzerland a few years ago, and I went to Bollingen. I've read his book, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, so many times, and I saw the church. And obviously, I couldn't get into the house, but the fence was a little bit kind of broken down, where probably lots and lots of. So I went to the house, touched the walls. It was
Yeah,
really. It was just incredible. It was beautiful, really. I'd read so much about it, and I didn't get to go in his study, but his study was overlooking. I think it's Lake Zurich, isn't it? With my
it
memory, and the
is.
mountains, and it just mirrors the expansiveness of his soul, I guess, for want of a better word, really. Yeah.
I think you're right. Symbolically, because
Mm,
symbols are very important in Jungian
mm,
psychology. He lived on the water,
mm.
on the Lake Zurich.
Yeah.
So the house in Kusnacht was on the water. The house in Bollingen also on the
Mm.
water.
Yes.
And, and in Bollingen, it was very much primitive. He cooked, he did his own paintings on the
Built it
walls.
himself, didn't he? Apparently.
Totally, yes.
Yeah.
And in Kusnacht, he would go out on you could see it on the lake. He would do sand play. He would
Yes.
play.
Yeah.
You see, so here's
Mm,
where all of the techniques or whatever that's used now, they
mm,
began on the lake,
mm. Yeah.
symbolically a place of depth,
Mm,
the unknown.
mm.
What is there? And the mountains
Mm,
as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
so true. Yeah. And in terms of the work you do, and I wanted to touch on the workshops. Um, could you maybe just say a little bit around the other work that you do? Do you run workshops? Do I remember that right? Or maybe I
I
don't.
do. You
Yeah.
have it correctly.
Okay.
I do. Oftentimes around the themes of the
Mm,
books, mostly around those themes. And it's on my website. I have sample pages of books. I have articles.
right.
I have presentations that I do,
Mm,
podcasts, all kinds of things. It's on
mm,
my website,
mm.
SusanSchwartzPhD.com. Easy to access.
Mm, fantastic. And as I say, we'll put all of the links to the books and your website onto our social media and with the show notes. Um, so much to talk about. I just wonder, I know we're running short of time, but I must ask you about synchronicity because that is another thing that's really in the public domain. I
Yes.
mean, I look at my own life and goodness me, there's synchronicity everywhere, but for people that don't really understand what that is, again, it's a massive question, I know, but could you just say a little bit around your conception, your
Yes.
conceptualization of it? Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. Because I'm glad you said that
Mm,
because I thought about that a
mm,
couple of comments ago and then I
mm,
forgot. But
mm,
so I'm glad. I find the synchronicity is, and this is me finding it, but how I work with people as well.
yeah.
A lot of people will access their astrology.
Mm,
They will access what happened on this date,
mm,
or they will access something will come along. I just heard it a little while ago. They were reading something and something happened externally. The two come together and there's meaning.
yeah.
So, what Jung was talking about is making the meaning and the synchronicities. They happen all day long.
Yeah, they do.
Many people say, "Oh, that was silly. It doesn't count." No,
Mm,
counts and it makes the depth of meaning and the value of oneself
mm,
totally solid. It also, I think it keeps us, this is going to sound strange, it keeps us from going crazy because we know that there is a meaning in this event, this, and it's not just random. It is meant. It's
Definitely. Yeah.
and to value that means that you see absolutely more beauty in
Yes.
life.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's how I view it. And even I think we don't know why we are doing this or this. And then afterwards, something happens
Mm,
and we realize
mm,
again, the personality's expanded.
mm. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And I guess I mean, again, we don't have to go down this road, but I guess, but this kind of theory of synchronicity, I mean, it's supported by quantum mechanics, particle, it's almost as if, I think this is probably true with a lot of Jung's work that science is actually catching up now. And science is coming to the same point that Jung came to. It's fascinating to watch that happen, isn't it? Jung's intuition, arguably, it's and also the fact that he looked at so many different areas to create his model. But now science is kind of catching up. Or I don't know whether you feel the same way, but
Oh, I do. I think
yeah,
that the knowledge of the brain
mm,
has also something that Jung was a precursor of
yeah,
as well. And I think that that adds to our knowledge and it adds to synchronicities.
yes, yeah,
So we use the brain to expand. It's not just brain. It's not just cells in the brain. It's all.
mm,
So what is the meaning of this? And why is it there in my life?
mm,
That's the other.
mm,
That's what is gorgeous about the synchronicity. I
mm,
feel actually, sadly, that more people don't realize the beauty in the synchronicities
yeah.
because they are shortchanging themselves from living a fuller life.
I would absolutely agree with that. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think when you start looking through that lens, and I'm not saying that I'm perfect. Probably I miss loads of synchronous, things. But when I'm just locked into materialistic world, but the beauty, I often see it looking back actually retrospectively. Sliding door moments. There's a million ways to describe this kind of stuff, isn't there?
There are.
Yeah.
And the synchronicities tie
Mm,
in with what we find in active imagination,
mm,
our dreams, the analytical work, the
mm,
relationships. They all contain the synchronicities.
mm,
Putting them together, it's like
mm,
knitting together the psyche.
mm, mm.
So they're in all the things that we do.
Mm. Yeah, I mean that's really wonderful. I mean, it really kind of shows the beauty of the work that you do. We're almost out of time. I literally could talk to you forever, but is there anything that you would like to say that I've not given you the opportunity to today, Susan?
Actually, you've been great at expanding into a world that I have benefited from my whole life.
Yeah,
And I've appreciated your knowledge and what you've brought forth because it kind of fit with what we were talking about, which is the flow of life.
yeah.
So I have appreciated your commentary and our discussion very much.
Thank you. It has been really wonderful to have you on the show. I've never had the opportunity to talk to interview a Jungian analyst on the show. So I'm so pleased that we've been able to touch on such an important area. Yeah, I mean it's such a big area. We could spend months, years talking about it, couldn't we? But hopefully our listeners will have got a flavour really of what Jungian, analytic psychology has to offer, which is a lot.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. That was the point of our meeting, was to pass on what we know to other people so they can expand their lives as well.
Absolutely. And I just want to thank you so much, Susan, for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
And I just want to thank Susan again for coming on the show. I don't know whether our listeners could hear my excitement. I'm talking about Jung and his work. I really, really am so passionate about Jung's work. I've not trained, unfortunately, as a Jungian analytic psychologist, but I would love to. I spent a lot of time reading Jung's collective works, and I use things like active imagination in my own work as a therapist. And yeah, there was no area really that Jung didn't interrogate through, the lens of his analytic psychology. So I would really, really encourage our listeners to check him out. A good place to start would be his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. Um, it has been said that some of his work is quite dense and quite difficult to read. I wouldn't always agree with that, actually, to be honest, but I think it's a really, really good place to start. And there's also another book called The Essential Jung, edited by Anthony Storr, and that has um, parts of his most important papers from the start of his career to the end of his career. And any listeners really interested in embedding themselves in Jungian analytic psychology, I would suggest they check that book out. It's really, really well put together, and it gives you a flavour, I think, of his thinking from the start of his career to the end of his career. As I said in the interview, I would love to have met him. What an incredible guy. And his work is just everywhere in terms of personality typology, introversion, extroversion, synchronicity. I mean, there's just so much, that's come from Jung that is just in our everyday life now. Absolutely amazing person, and what a fantastic interview. If you'd like to check out any of the things that Susan does, her workshops, her many books, please do check out her website. If you check on the show notes or look on our social media sites, we'll have links to Susan's website and all of the books and everything else she does. I could have literally talked to her for hours. So difficult to cover, somebody's lifetime work in the space of 40 minutes. And also, I was really interested in hearing about the C.G. Jung Institute and what it was like to train there. And also really nice to have another guest from the United States on the show. Coming up in a week or so, I'm interviewing Gary Evans, who is a renowned expert on ecotherapy and the benefits of being in nature, forest bathing. So that should be a fascinating show. We'll be talking about mindfulness, talking about, some of the science, the increasing scientific information, which is resonating with the fact that being in nature is incredibly good for us in many ways. I mean, I guess that shouldn't be a surprise, really. But I think, as a human race, we have got, somewhat disconnected from nature. Well, very disconnected from nature, honestly. This is part of the reason that, we're in the middle of a ecological crisis, and the work that Gary does and the work that, people all over the world do in trying to get people to reconnect with the beauty and therapeutic nature, value of nature is incredibly important, which is why I cover it. I cover this area at least once on every series. I want to thank our listeners for listening. Got a lot of good shows coming up. We're going to be moving around and exploring lots and lots of different areas during season 6. Thank you for Joe for all the hard work he does behind the scenes, producing and editing the show. And thank you for listening. If you are enjoying the show, if you're enjoying the audio podcast, or if you're enjoying the show on YouTube, please do subscribe. Lots of people listen to the show, watch the show on YouTube and don't subscribe. If you are enjoying the show and enjoying the content, please subscribe, please leave a comment. Joe and I love it when we get comments around the show. If there's a guest or an area that you feel it would be important for us to cover, then please do let us know. And we'll have a look at that. We're very open to getting kind of feedback from our listeners. And we're going to finish now, but as I always say at the end of the show, look after yourselves, look after each other, and look after the planet. And I'll see you in a week or so on the next episode. Thanks so much for listening.